For most of human history, the idea of choosing a partner for love, as we understand it today, was practically non-existent. This might sound shocking to anyone who grew up listening to love songs and watching romantic movies, but the anthropological evidence is compelling. Romantic love as the primary basis for forming a couple is, historically speaking, a fairly recent invention. For hundreds of thousands of years, mate selection among our ancestors was determined primarily by survival factors, not feelings. In hunter-gatherer groups, forming a couple was about finding someone capable of contributing to the group's survival, whether through physical strength, hunting or gathering skills, or the ability to care for and protect offspring. Desire, deep emotional connection, and the idea of the love of your life simply weren't priorities, because in an environment where death from starvation, disease, or predator attacks was a constant threat, surviving together was far more important than feeling butterflies in your stomach. However, this doesn't mean that attraction, desire, or strong emotional bonds didn't exist between our ancestors. What happened is that these feelings were guided by very ancient biological mechanisms, designed by evolution to maximize the chances of having healthy offspring and ensuring their survival. For example, studies in evolutionary psychology have shown that certain physical traits we consider attractive today, such as facial symmetry, a certain waist-to-hip ratio, or a body that reflects good overall health, actually function as unconscious signals of fertility and good genetics, signals that our ancestors learned to detect without needing to understand the biology behind them. Here's a particularly interesting fact related to smell. Studies have shown that women were asked to smell t-shirts worn by different men over several days without knowing their identities, and they consistently preferred the scent of those men whose immune systems were genetically more different from their own. This is not a coincidence. It is an evolutionary mechanism that favors genetic diversity in offspring, resulting in children with stronger immune systems and greater resistance to disease. Our ancestors, with absolutely no knowledge of genetics, made mate choices influenced by these chemical signals that operated completely outside their conscious awareness. It is also important to understand that monogamy, as we know it today, was not necessarily the norm throughout human history. Anthropological evidence suggests that many ancient societies practiced much more flexible systems, including polygyny, where a man with sufficient resources or social status could have several partners simultaneously, something still observed in some cultures today. This was not a matter of romanticism, but rather of reproductive and survival strategy. More partners and more offspring increased the chances that at least some children would survive in an environment where infant mortality was extremely high. Physical contact also played a central role in forming bonds before the modern concept of romance existed. Social grooming, that is, the mutual cleaning of the body and hair, so common in primates like chimpanzees, served a function that went far beyond hygiene. It released endorphins and strengthened trust between individuals. Some researchers argue that the romantic kiss, so universal in modern cultures, may have its evolutionary origin precisely in this type of grooming behavior and physical closeness, transformed over time into a gesture laden with emotional meaning. The concept of romantic love, as we know it today, the idea of finding a special, unique person destined to complete you emotionally, began to develop culturally only a few centuries ago and became massively popular with 20th century literature and film. Before that, in much of the world, marriages were arranged for family, economic, or social convenience, and love, if it existed between the couple, was considered an added benefit, not an essential requirement. However, this doesn't mean that the emotions we feel today when we fall in love are false or artificial. Quite the contrary. The dopamine released during the initial stages of intense attraction, the oxytocin that strengthens attachment over time, and the feeling of euphoria that many describe when near someone they like are real neurochemical processes, inherited from our ancestors, which at the time served the evolutionary function of keeping a couple together long enough to raise their children in an extremely hostile environment. What's fascinating is that, although we live in a completely different world today, with dating apps, social media, and countless potential partners available at the swipe of a screen, we are still largely guided by the same instincts that guided our ancestors tens of thousands of years ago. We continue to seek, even if unconsciously, signs of health, genetic compatibility, stability, and security, disguised in the modern guise of chemistry or special connection. An additional element that evolutionary psychology has studied in detail is the origin of jealousy. Far from being simply a negative or irrational emotion, jealousy seems to have served a specific protective function throughout evolution, motivating behaviors aimed at protecting the couple's relationship and, in evolutionary terms, ensuring the certainty of parenthood or preventing abandonment in a context where raising children alone was extremely difficult. This doesn't justify possessive or harmful behavior today, but it helps us understand why this emotion is so intense and universal in virtually all known human cultures, regardless of their level of technological or social development. It's also interesting to note that arranged marriages for family convenience, so common historically and still practiced in several cultures today, didn't necessarily produce unhappy relationships or those lacking emotional connection. Sociological studies comparing long-term marital satisfaction between arranged marriages and marriages based on romantic love have surprisingly found similar levels of satisfaction over the years, suggesting that a deep emotional bond can be built gradually through cohabitation, shared commitment, and time, and doesn't depend exclusively on that initial spark that our modern culture often considers indispensable for love. So the next time you feel that hard-to-explain attraction to someone, or that feeling that you just click, remember that behind this seemingly human and modern emotion, there's an ancestral instinct working silently, the same instinct that helped our ancestors survive and ensured the human species' survival to this day, to you watching this video. If you're interested in understanding why we feel what we feel, this is the right place to continue exploring it. I invite you to subscribe to the channel and keep discovering something new together every day.